Hi, I'm Dr. Weibo. Welcome to the Innovation in Medicine podcast. As an engineer and physician, I've always been interested in innovation in medical technology. In this podcast, I'll talk to doctors, engineers, scientists, and other leaders in medicine to gain their perspectives on the past, present, and future of innovation in medicine. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dr. Ackerman. He is an emergency medicine physician at Emory University and Grady Memorial Hospital. In part 1 of our conversation, we discussed about new innovative ideas that are taking place in the front lines as they are fighting the coronavirus pandemic. As we finished part 1, we were talking about the new innovative device that can be used during patient intubation, and in result, it can protect the spread of the coronavirus to physicians. And so here is a continuation of my conversation with Dr. Ackerman as we discuss more about new and other innovative ways that are being developed, as well as different challenges that they face in coming up with these new ideas. And so just following up to that, how do you see the field of emergency medicine changing, or even just healthcare overall, in your opinion, after all this crisis is kind of gone, when you reflect?
So emergency medicine has a little bit different problem than I think a lot of other healthcare has, because it's a little bit harder to figure out how we do what we do, not in a face-to-face way. Um, Interestingly, our department very early on, as soon as CMS announced that some of the barriers to using telemedicine, billing and coding, were going to be reduced, um, we all were told, hey, do the online training module so that you can do telemedicine. Um, we probably, even though it's not obvious how emergency medicine is a specialty that can be done with telemedicine, we probably will be using telemedicine codes. And some of that may even be things where the patient comes to the ER and we put them in a room that's easily cleanable. And we do telemedicine, even though they may physically be 15 feet away from me.
Mm.
Um, because we are able to assess them enough through that kind of thing and recognize, hey, this is not that kind of emergency that actually requires an in-person visit, or it needs a blood draw and an x-ray, and we
Mm-hmm.
can get that done really efficiently, but it's not worth the PPE for me to go into the room. um, so we'll use a different billing strategy than we'd normally use. um, the CMS taking away the barriers for telemedicine and increasing the reimbursement is going to create some huge changes in medicine. Um, I believe CMS has already said we're not going back to pre-COVID billing in terms of telemedicine.
Mm.
And having this interval where a lot of practices and a lot of clinicians really have no other option but to use telemedicine, uh, and then having the financial infrastructure to reimburse for it, means that the days of everybody assuming you have to go to the doctor's office to see the doctor are probably over, or at
Mm.
least they should be.
Mm-hmm.
um, Going to the doctor's office is a waste of everybody's time. You got to go and park and sit in the waiting room and get coughed on and all of that. When we know an awful lot of patients that we see, more than the physical exam, the history, the getting a good version of the story, and then very focused elements of physical exam are what we need, particularly in an era where we're increasingly reliant on imaging studies and lab tests and things like that. Um, So I suspect that we're going to see these very broad changes across specialties, that your first consultation is going to be something like this.
Hmm.
So you as a future ENT are going to hear the story, go, oh, did you get the otoscope attachment for your phone that I mailed you? Stick that
Hmm.
guy in your ear. Let's get a quick look. And so you'll only see people in your office that you need to do a more invasive exam, or that you know what imaging they need, or that you're only bringing them in to do a procedure that's something that cannot be done remotely. Um, that's going to require a change, whether we're even still worried about things like COVID or not. Your waiting rooms are going to change. Your office
Hmm.
spaces are going to change. Um, the where and how, and perhaps even the credentialing requirements are hopefully going to change. Um, and any time that there's a forced change, there's this opportunity for innovation.
Yeah.
Uh, because what it says is what we thought were the rules of how we're playing this game are not actually the rules. And so we have an opportunity to re-explore what the boundaries are, and do things differently. So in
Nice.
emergency medicine, to a degree, we may end up actually ultimately changing less than other specialties,
Yeah.
because we're still going to be the place that people drive up, walk up, get pushed out of their cars, whatever it is, ambulances show up, and we're going to take care of those people. Um, and so in some ways what we do may change the least, although I think we're all very, and in some cases very painfully aware, of the risk of what we do, for when the next,
Mhm.
COVID or other threat starts emerging. um, we have to deal with it before anybody knows what it is. And I suspect we probably are going to build up some more resiliency, for facing those kinds of threats, or at least I hope so.
Nice. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. When I just can't imagine yet, but because the time when we had the, let's say, electronic medical records, right, rolled in or something like that. And I remember, I think I was in high school shadowing some physician, and I remember that physician wasn't very, they didn't really like it much, just because they're used to doing it the old way, right? They like writing on paper and just having everything set up. So how do you think physicians are when it comes to new innovations? Are they open towards it, or how, or is it really person to person kind of thing?
um so I think universally physicians are open to innovation. The issue is not their like, the theory of innovating is not a problem. It
Mm-hmm.
is the reality of changing what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and that's what we don't like doing. You're coming to the end of 4 years as a medical student. um, and one of the things that you've learned is, if I, as a faculty member, ask you a question, how many answers are there to that question?
One.
Yeah, there's only one answer. And even if there's actually more than one answer, the only answer that matters is the one that I intend you to answer.
Yeah.
So I'll catch myself sometimes in working with medical students. I'll ask a question and realize, as I'm thinking through the question, that, oh, wait, there actually are a couple of answers that would be reasonable.
Mm.
There's the textbook one, and then there's the one that I'm thinking of, which may not be the textbook one. And
Mm-hmm.
then there's the crazy idea that, some medical student comes up with that may actually be right, but I'm not smart enough to have figured it out yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take another 10 years to prove that that answer is right.
Mm.
And that's when I look at the medical student who's now sitting there perplexed, because hopefully they have all three of these answers running through their mind, and they're like, uh-oh. And I'm like, no, this is the read my mind game. Read my
Mm-hmm.
mind. Which answer do I want you to tell me? And the problem, I think, with clinicians in general is we go through this process of medical school and residency and board certification, where even in a world where the reality is there are multiple answers to almost every question, um, we have a deeply ingrained process that there's only one right answer. There's only one way to do the procedure. There's only one medication. Even when we're called out on it and we can recognize that it fundamentally is not true,
Mhm.
um, we tend to gravitate towards there's only one way. And that means while we may be very open to hearing about a new way, getting us to adopt a new way um, is painful. Um, and you know, again, the nice thing about having an external disaster is that it forces change.
Yeah.
I've got to do my intubations differently because I really don't want to get sick,
Mhm.
right? And suddenly I have a forcing function that makes me have to do something differently. That it doesn't matter. You could tell me to you blue in the face, you know, oh, you know, aerosolization during intubation someday could be really bad. So, well,
Mhm.
I don't care. Like the likelihood of me having to intubate an Ebola patient is vanishingly small,
Yeah.
right? Even when we were worried about Ebola, we were never that worried about Ebola here,
Mhm.
right? And so it didn't cause that external crisis didn't cause anybody to change practice pattern. But now when we're in an era where, you know, if somebody needs to be intubated, um, the assumption is they've got COVID
Yeah.
and they are contagious,
Yeah.
and that means it doesn't matter, you know, suddenly I've got to think about the plexiglass box or putting a sheet over the patient or elevating my level of PPE to where I've got even a little bit higher level of protection, and thinking about how many people are in the room and all of those things.
Yeah.
um, so even though I don't really want to change, um, you know, I'm literally getting slapped upside the head going, you've got to change, you've got to change.
The next thing I wanted to get into was are you involved in any other entities outside of your regular practice? And maybe can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you're able to balance those things out?
So yes, I'm involved in all kinds of additional things. So I'll give you a short list, and then we can figure out which ones you want me to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah.
So you mentioned teaching over at Georgia Tech. So you know, I actually am paid about 25% of my time to be involved in teaching at Georgia Tech and working with biomedical engineering. Um, Something I've actually gotten involved in, and you're probably not aware of this since it's well after you were in the class. I actually have been working with law enforcement and tactical medicine teams.
Mm.
So I actually have two SWAT teams that I work with regularly, train with regularly, and when they get activated for emergencies and do other sorts of things that SWAT teams get involved with, I'm frequently out riding with them. In fact, this past summer, I even went to the police academy. So I am
Nice.
certified by the state of Georgia. I'm eligible to be a police officer.
Nice.
Um, so you know, and that actually was something that I got into as part of an innovation process, and is something that I was a little bit surprised at how much I'd be interested, and some of the opportunities there have been pretty fabulous. You know, we talked about before with my kids. I've got kids; they're in school. Both of my kids are involved in the Scouts BSA programs. My son's in a troop, and he is just starting to think about what he's going to do for his Eagle Scout project.
Mm.
My daughter is in a troop as well, and she's kind of working along on things. Um, and so I've been involved in both of their troops, as well as in kind of multiple layers within scouts. So, you know, we've got a district area, and the step up above that is the council. So I'm the senior health officer for the council. Over the summer, I supervise on the medical side 2 summer camps, and I want to say we take care of about 12,000, maybe a little more than that, scouts each summer, that kind of come through the camps, and I oversee the health lodges for those camps. And then with scouts, I'm also involved at the national level. So when they have policy statements and other responses to health issues, there are committees that go through and provide recommendations and all of that, and help review some of those things before they're made public.
Mm.
And so I work with them at the national level as well. Um, yeah, that's sort of the short list. Probably if I look at my schedule, I could come up with half a dozen other things.
Yeah.
Something relevant to the conversation about innovation.
Mm.
Emory recently has been starting these interdisciplinary residency tracks where residents from any specialty can take some additional classes, do some additional activities, and get an additional certificate when they graduate. So I am the co-director of the medical innovation track for Emory. Uh, and this year we tried to make it available on a little bit more of a regional basis by inviting residents from Morehouse School of Medicine to
Nice.
apply as well. So that's something that I do with Dr. Berku, who's one of the EUHM interventional radiologists.
Nice, nice. That's amazing. I'm probably might get involved in there, when I get started. So
Yep.
please accept my application. I'm just kidding.
We'll,
um,
we'll look forward to it in a year or two.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for all these amazing answers. I just have two more questions for you, and then we should be good to go.
Okay.
Um, So, do you have any advice for any medical students or physicians that are interested in, just being more innovators in their fields?
So medical students are a little bit challenging, and part of that is, as a medical student, when you're working with me as a attending physician, as your teacher, to a degree, I don't want you really having the innovative mindset that I think you need to really innovate well. Um, because to really do that well, you need to be prepared and actively challenging everything.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably not going to make you very popular as a medical student, and may make it challenging to get the grades you want, and doesn't really prepare you well for taking the tests and getting through checking off all the boxes that you need to do as a medical student. Um, so I think as a medical student, the challenge becomes not so much thinking about innovation in the medical space. Actually would encourage medical students to look at other aspects of their lives, hobbies, other things that they do, and practice the steps of being innovative in sort of safe zones that are not going to potentially interfere with your career objectives.
Yeah.
So if, I do woodworking. So if you're a medical student who does woodworking, keep on doing woodworking and go, wow, I have this problem with my table saw that I don't think the safety thing on my table saw, um, it's scratching my wood, right? And then working through that problem. Is there a way that I could keep pieces of wood from kicking out of my table saw without running the risk of marring a finish on a piece of wood? And find little problems like that you can explore, that you can work around, that you can look for solutions and even implement solutions, and kind of keep your mind in that mode of questioning. But when you show up in the hospital and you show up to take the test, no, you're just the medical student and you've got the right answer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, Going through residency, I think is a similar challenge. I talked about the residency track very briefly. Um, most of the people we're asking to apply, if they're in a 3-year residency program, we'd be looking at them starting during their second year. Um, I think ideally, innovation is really something in terms of physicians that very late in a residency program or even during a fellowship, when you understand what the generally accepted right answer is,
Hmm.
and you know why it's the right answer, that's when you're ready to go ahead and start questioning it. You can do it the way we all expect you to do it. And hopefully at that point, you have smarter questions to ask than a medical student who looks and goes, "Oh, well, you should just do it this way." And, I'll roll my eyes and go, "Okay, there are 23 things you just didn't consider."
Hmm.
So as a fellow, as a more senior resident, it puts you in a position where you should know most of the concerns that would be raised, but are not so deeply ingrained that you can't see new and different ways of doing things. Um, I think even as a practicing clinician beyond residency, because so much of what we do in medicine is sort of routine care that probably shouldn't require us to overthink.
Yeah.
Like, the right answer is probably right. Um, that having sort of those side things that you do that are different, that allow you a little bit more freedom to innovate, I think is a very helpful thing to fall back on. Um, because the reality is, you probably shouldn't be innovating within medicine every single moment, right? Your patients
Yeah.
probably won't get very good care if you're doing that all the time. At some point, um, in medicine, even if you're innovating, you have to stop and standardize and find out, okay, is this actually better? Um, and so having that pathway on the side is something where you can safely play around with innovating, not within healthcare, I think is really important. And that's part of some of the things that I do on the side. Uh, they're relevant to healthcare.
Mm.
My issue with working with SWAT teams, part of why I decided to do that was I wanted to do medical device development for tactical and military use. And
Mm.
I had no tactical or military experience.
Hmm.
A great way to learn about it is to jump in and do it. At the same time, it also is an area where, although there are some protocols and there are some devices, it's a little bit of a wide open. And the unfortunate reality of care under fire, that is trying to do medical care when people are literally shooting at you, is pretty much every time you do it, you're improvising.
Yeah.
You've got an algorithm that you're following, but where the bad guys are, what they're shooting at you with, combined with what the injuries are, you've got to take what you know and run with it each and every time. Uh, and so it's an interesting and almost creative challenge. I've got my little shop in my garage,
Mm.
and I've got a wide variety of tools, and coming up with a different way to make a fancy pen on a lathe. The reality is, I've got to use the lathe tools and all of that, but there are lots of little ways that I can change the process. And the cool thing there is that if I do something different, um, usually the worst case scenario is what I'm working on sort of disintegrates in front of me.
Hmm.
And I go, oops, that didn't work. I suppose I could have something worse. They are power tools. I could have a piece of wood or a metal tool explode, or, um, you know, embed a big sharp thing in me, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but again, it's a place that I can do some pretty wild things, and if it doesn't work out, there's no real consequence. I look at it, go, I've got some stuff to vacuum up. I've got
Hmm.
some band-aids to put on, and turn off the lights in the shop, and think about what went wrong there. So I think that those having those other creative outlets, that allow you to, on a daily basis, um, innovate in your own way, in your own comfort spaces, is actually kind of important to being able to do broader innovation and meaningful innovation in healthcare, to recognize when you're looking at a problem that doesn't just need to be solved because you want to solve it, but has broader implications, potential for bigger impacts, that you can take the time to go and validate with other providers, with other patients, with ancillary staff. Hey, I think I'm seeing something here that needs to be fixed. Is there something that needs to be fixed? Is there perhaps, hopefully, somebody who'd be willing to pay for
Mm-hmm.
us to fix this problem? Um, are there people who can help me fix this problem? Um, because within healthcare, and I'm sure I said this when you were in my class, the challenge of problem solving within healthcare, as much as the idea of thinking outside the box is wonderful, is healthcare as a system is this very complicated box, and almost everything we do has to somehow get crammed back inside the box.
Yeah.
um, we may have unique opportunities where we can redefine what the box is, and that's part of the coolness of COVID and how we're responding to it, is the walls of the box are being redefined in real time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, at the same time, at some point, we're going to reach a steady state where CMS is not actively changing the rules, and we will have the PPE that we're going to get, and all those pieces will become, this is our new reality. Um, and then our solutions are going to have to conform to the box. And part of the trick of understanding the problem is really getting to know the box well enough that you know where the boundaries of the box are, you know where the gray boundaries and the fuzzy boundaries, the ones where you really can push and do something different are,
Mm-hmm.
versus the ones that, right or wrong, are currently sort of immutable, and maybe a place for future innovation, but right now are not going to be places to innovate. So,
Mm-hmm.
long-winded answer as usual to
No, no, no. That was great. That was great. Actually, you actually end up answering my question from that. So I'm glad you did that. Again, thank you so much for taking the time. Um, you have always been a great mentor to not just myself, but so many other people. So I appreciate you and thank you for the service that you're doing right now during this crisis. Just putting your life out there and your family out there pretty much in the front lines. We appreciate you for being a hero. And yeah, this means a lot to me. So again, thank you. It means a
well,
lot.
I truly appreciate you saying so. Like I said, catching up with students even a few years after my class and kind of seeing where they go, hearing where they're going, is really a pretty amazing thing to have. So I am truly appreciative of you reaching out and having this chat with me.
Appreciate it. I'm sure I'll see you around in the ED or something, like usual.
I'm certain, and you know where to find me.
Yes, sir. All right, Dr. Ackerman. Thank you.
All right, bye now.
All right, bye. Thank you for listening to this podcast. I would really appreciate it if you could rate, review, and subscribe for more content. Feel free to follow me on Instagram, and you can also find the video interview of this podcast on YouTube. See the link in the description. Until then, see you next time.